It's 6 in the morning. The mansion is quiet. Ayana is already on her feet. Her day begins with the first ray of sunlight. It falls on the clean floor in the hallway. She moves silently, checks the coffee machine, wipes dust. Her hands know every object in this house. At 7, she makes breakfast. Oatmeal, 2 eggs, juice. Everything has to be hot when he comes down. At 7:30, footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, it's Jin-ho. Ayana stands at the table, looking at the floor. He passes by. He sits down, opens his tablet, and eats without looking at his food. Coffee. He doesn't look at her. His gaze is somewhere over her shoulder. Ayana pours coffee into a cup. She places it on the right. She knows he doesn't add sugar, but the spoon should always be nearby. Everything is according to the rules. He's reading the news. Jin-ho Kao, there's no one in the house in the evening, no noise. Ayana. Yes, sir. He finishes his coffee, gets up, and leaves. His breakfast is over. Her work continues. She clears the plates, washes a cup. Then she goes to check the rooms. In the office, she adjusts the curtains. Her fingers touch the table. She feels a speck of dust. She takes a cloth and removes it. Everything must be perfect. Sometimes she hears him talking on the phone. Jin-ho. Delivery by Friday. No errors. Ayana doesn't listen to his words. She listens to his tone. From it, she understands his mood. Should he be quieter? In 10 years, she learned to read him. And he never looked at her. The day goes on as usual. Washing, ironing, cleaning. Ayana is like a shadow, appearing and disappearing. After lunch, Jin-ho calls her again. She is standing at the door. He looks out the window, his back to her. Jin-ho. The house is quiet tonight, perfectly tidy. Do you understand? Ayana. Yes, sir. Jin-ho. It means I don't want to see anyone, hear anyone. After 7, you disappear. If I notice movement, hear a sound, it will end badly for you. I have guests. They must not be disturbed by anything. Ayana feels a chill down her spine. His words are law. Ayana. I'll do everything as you say. Jin-ho. Make sure. She leaves. Her heart beats faster. His guests are not kind people. Any mistake she makes will be her last. Ayana finishes polishing her fork. Her phone vibrates in her pocket. It's Sora, her only friend. Ayana goes into her room and answers. Ayana. Hello? Sora. Ayana, you have to come. You have to. Ayana. Where? What happened? Sora. It's my birthday today. You promised to get away for at least an hour. Ayana closes her eyes. She promised, but she just heard the order. After 7, you dissolve. Ayana. Sora, I can't. It's an important evening at the Masters. He strictly forbade it. Sora. But you won't be at the house. You'll be at mine. Please. We haven't seen each other in ages. I need you here, just for an hour. Sora's voice is tearful. Ayana clutches her phone. 10 years of her life are like shadows. Only Sora remains. Ayana. Okay, I'll come. But not for long. Sora squeals with joy into the phone. Sora. Thank you. You're the best. Wear something nice, okay? Not your uniform. Ayana looks at her reflection in the window. Gray dress. Tight bun. Ayana. Okay, I'll try. The workday is over. Ayana finishes her chores. She washes the kitchen floors. The house is quiet. Ho's guests appear. The men's voices are muffled. Time to leave. Ayana creeps up the stairs to her room. There's a single dress hanging in the closet. Not a uniform. A simple blue dress. Sora gave it to her, but Ayana has never worn it. She takes off the gray dress and hangs it up. She puts on the blue one. The fabric is soft and cool. It fits differently. She goes to the mirror. She takes the pins out of her hair. Her dark hair falls in a heavy wave over her shoulders. She runs her fingers through it. She looks in the mirror. Before her is not a servant, a girl. With large eyes, in a blue dress, with loose hair. She almost doesn't recognize herself. She picks up her purse, puts her phone down, takes a deep breath. She needs to be quick and quiet. But now she doesn't feel like a shadow. She feels like a person. She opens the door and listens. There are voices downstairs. She needs to go through the hall to the back door. Ayana creeps down this hallway. Her shoes make no noise. Here she is in the hall, a few more steps and she's out. And at that moment, Jin-ho comes out of the living room. She walked quickly, almost running to the door, and didn't see him. Ayana slammed her shoulder into him, hard as stone. She stumbled back, barely keeping her balance. Jin-ho also took a step back. His hand automatically rose, as if to grab or push away the intruder. His eyebrows drew together sharply. Their eyes met. Ayana froze. Everything inside her twisted into a knot. She waited for the anger to flash in his eyes. Recognition. Then a scream. But none of this happened. His gaze slid over her face, over her loose hair, over the blue fabric of the dress on her shoulders. The anger in his eyes melted, replaced for a moment by something else. Curiosity, attentive, scrutinizing, as if he were examining an interesting painting or a stranger on the street. He looked at her but did not see her. He saw a woman who accidentally walked into his hall. Jin-ho was silent. His face was impassive. Only his eyes gleamed with that strange, fleeting interest. He waited for her to speak. Who she was. What she wanted here. Ayana couldn't move. The words were stuck in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. A few seconds passed. The silence became heavy. Jin-ho finally spoke. His voice was even, cold, emotionless. He asked a simple question, just 2 words. Jin-ho, who are you? Ayana felt the floor shift beneath her. Those 2 words hit her harder than a scream, harder than a threat. He didn't recognize her. He looked straight at her and didn't understand who was standing in front of him. Her entire world, her entire life of the last 10 years. The morning coffee, the polished floors, his quiet commands, all of it had crumbled to dust. She was nothing to him. A ghost. A nothing. Her lips trembled. She forced herself to exhale. Ayana. It's me, sir. Ayana. Now a real expression appeared on his face. Not anger, not curiosity. Complete and utter bewilderment. His eyebrows rose again. He slowly, as if not believing his eyes, looked her over from head to toe. His gaze lingered again on her hair, on her dress. No. Ayana? He spoke her name as if it were a foreign word, as if he were hearing it for the first time. There was no recognition in his voice, only a question. She nodded, unable to speak anymore. He looked at her for another second. Then his face became smooth and stony again, but a strange spark remained in his eyes. Uncomfort? Irritation? Jin-ho silently stepped aside, making way for her to exit. He said nothing more. He simply watched. Ayana broke through. She pushed the heavy door open and rushed out into the street. The cold evening air burned her lungs. Sora's party was loud and cheerful. Music played in the small apartment. People laughed, and the table groaned under the weight of food. Sora hugged Ayana and pulled her inside. Sora, you came! You look amazing! I told you so! She introduced Ayana to Jason, a sweet, smiling guy who kept looking at Sora with loving eyes. Everything was good, warm, cozy. But Ayana didn't feel this warmth. She sat on the edge of the sofa with a glass of juice in her hands and smiled when necessary. She nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She saw his face again and again, his cold, appraising eyes sliding over her as if she were an object in a store. She heard his voice. Who are you? The words rang in her head, drowning out the music and laughter. She lived in his house for 10 years. For 10 years, she knew his every breath, his every habit. She could tell his mood by the sound of his footsteps. She knew how his brow furrowed when he read bad news, and he didn't know what her face looked like. To him, she was just a function, a human vacuum cleaner, a human coffee maker. Her face didn't matter. It was erased. Invisible. Bitterness rose in her throat, bitter as metal. She put down the glass. Her smile became hard, strained. Jason was telling a funny story. Everyone was laughing. Ayana looked at their happy faces and felt like an outsider, like a ghost at a celebration of the living. She left the party early, citing fatigue. Sora hugged her goodbye and said, "Thank you." Ayana walked back to the mansion slowly. Every step was an effort. The blue dress now seemed silly and unnecessary, like a costume for a masquerade that ended in failure. She approached the back door. The door was locked. She had a key. She quietly opened it and crept inside. The house was quiet. The negotiations had apparently concluded. The guests had left. Only a faint light shone from under the living room door. Ayana sighed with relief. She'd have time to change and disappear into her room. Tomorrow everything would be as usual. She'd be a shadow again. She tiptoed through the kitchen and was already heading for the stairs when a voice stopped her. It was quiet but distinct. It was coming from the living room. Jin-ho, Ayana. She froze in place, her heart sinking. He didn't leave. He waited. Ayana turned slowly and walked to the living room door. It was ajar. Jin-ho sat in a large armchair by the fireplace. There was no fire burning. A glass of dark liquid sat on a nearby table. He didn't drink. He simply sat and stared straight at the door. At her. His face was serious, not angry, but very focused. Jin-ho. Come in. It wasn't an order. His voice lacked its usual firmness, but it wasn't a request either. It was something in between. Something new. Ayana stepped inside. She stood in the middle of the room in her blue dress, feeling naked. He looked at her. His gaze was the same as in the hall, appraising, scrutinizing. But now he knew who she was, and he looked even more intently. He remained silent, waiting for her to speak. Ayana stared at the floor. She couldn't look up. Her whole game, her little escape, had turned into this. He'd caught her, and now he was watching the strange insect under the glass. The silence in the room became unbearable. He was silent for so long that Ayana thought her heart would leap out of her chest. She stood motionless, feeling his gaze crawl over her face, her dress, her hands clasped in front of him. He was searching for something. The features of the stranger from the hall. Finally, he spoke, but not about what happened. Jin-ho. Last month's electricity bill report. Did you prepare it? The question was ordinary, businesslike, but his voice sounded a little deeper, more attentive, and his eyes never left hers. Ayana looked at the rug at his feet. Ayana. Yes, sir. It's in the top drawer of your desk. Jin-ho. Okay, and salt. Ayana. Sir? Jin-ho. For the runners. They said there wasn't enough. We need to order more. She barely heard the words. She felt only his gaze. He didn't ask about the party. He didn't ask why she was wearing a dress. He pretended everything was as usual, but his attention, always scattered and directed past her, was now focused on her like a spotlight. Ayana. I'll make a list for the order tomorrow morning. Jin-ho. Tomorrow morning, he repeated slowly, as if testing the word. You did everything here today? Tonight? Now there was a real question in his voice, hidden behind the ordinary words. Ayana. Yes, sir. Everything is clear. She gave short, dry answers. She didn't add anything extra. She didn't look up. She was like a robot that had just received a new, strange signal and didn't know how to react to it. He fell silent again. Then he slowly lifted the glass from the table and took a sip. His movements were smooth, but Ayana saw his fingers grip the glass a little tighter than necessary. Jin-ho. Okay, go. Tomorrow is a normal day. He let her go, just like that. Ayana. Good night, sir. She turned and walked out of the living room without looking back. She felt his gaze on her back all the way to the stairs. In her room, Ayana closed the door and leaned her back against it. Only now did she allow herself to tremble. She shed her dress as if it burned her skin and put on an old, soft t-shirt. She went to bed, but sleep would not come. His eyes kept appearing before her eyes. At first, empty and curious, then searching and intent. He looked at her, but he didn't see her. He saw a mystery, a surprise in his own, perfectly controlled world. And she understood. She understood something that made her heart clench with a new, sharp pain. His indifference had been her prison all these years, but tonight she saw a crack in it. He was indifferent to the maid Ayani, but he was interested in the stranger in the blue dress. Interested because she was beyond his control, because he didn't recognize her. What if she takes this from him too? What if she becomes invisible to him again? On purpose. Not because he doesn't notice her, but because she refuses to be noticed. The thought was bitter and sweet at the same time. It was revenge. Quiet, cold. Her weapon would be his own behavior, the same one that had made her feel like nothing for 10 years. She won't look him in the eye. She won't answer more than necessary. She will be the perfect servant, the machine, the very one he always wanted her to be. Only now it will be her choice, her game. Indifference is a two-way street, and she decided to walk it. With this thought, sharp and clear as a blade, she finally fell asleep. Morning arrived as usual, 6 o'clock. Silence. Ayana put on her gray uniform. She carefully pulled her hair into a tight, sleek bun. Her face was clean, without a hint of makeup. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. The face of a servant, nothing superfluous. She went downstairs and began preparing breakfast. Her movements were precise, measured, not a single unnecessary gesture. At 7:30, he came downstairs. His footsteps were a little louder than usual. He entered the dining room. Ayana stood in her place at the buffet, looking past him at the vase of artificial flowers on the table. He sat down, was silent. Jin Hoo. Coffee. She poured coffee and placed the cup to his right. She did it as she had done thousands of times, but today she felt tension in the air. He was waiting for something. He took the cup but didn't drink. He looked at it. Jin Ho. The weather's going to get worse today. They say it's going to rain. This was unusual. He never talked about the weather. He never started a conversation unless it was about an order. Ayana slowly shifted her gaze, but not to his eyes. She looked at the bridge of his nose, at the point between his eyebrows. Her face remained completely calm, empty. Ayana. Yes, sir. We'll need to check if the windows on the top floor are closed. She responded to his useless remark with a helpful, practical suggestion. She looked down at his hands again, making sure he had everything he needed. He froze, cup in hand. She saw his fingers lightly tighten around the handle. He waited for their gazes to meet, waited for that attention, that silent question he'd seen in her eyes the night before. But she didn't give it to him. She looked nearby. Past. She was there, but unreachable. Like a reflection in water, visible, but intangible. He slowly set down his cup. He didn't try to speak again, but she felt his gaze on her throughout the rest of the meal. Heavy, questioning, almost disbelieving. When he stood up to leave, he paused for a second, as if expecting her to finally look at him. But Ayana was already collecting the plates, her movements fluid and unceasing. She was simply part of the machine of the house. He left without a word. The first fight was hers, all day. Jin Ho felt a strange unease. It was building up somewhere deep inside, under his ribs, making it difficult to concentrate. He sat in his office, trying to read the reports. The numbers swam before his eyes. Instead, he saw her. Yesterday, with her hair down and her wide, surprised eyes in the hall. And today, cold, precise, staring off into space above his shoulder or at the bridge of his nose. Why did it bother him so much? She was simply doing what she had to do, what she always did. But before, her invisibility had been a background noise, comfortable, like the quiet hum of a refrigerator. Now this invisibility had become active, deliberate. He felt her avoiding his gaze. Every time he tried to catch her eyes, she gently but inexorably slipped away. It was irritating, like a fly you can't swat. He called his lieutenant, Chang Min, to discuss business. But even during the conversation, his attention drifted. He heard a slight rustling sound outside the door. She was probably dusting the hallway. And he found himself waiting for the door to open and for her to enter. Waiting, yet simultaneously reluctant, because he knew he'd be met again with that empty, polite gaze. Changmin, boss, can you hear me? Jin Ho. What? Yes, go on. Changmin. The delivery, it's late. Do we need to take action? Jin Ho. Figure it out. Do it the way it needs to be done. He answered automatically. His thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about how bland breakfast had been today, even though the food had been exactly the same. Just, something was off. The air, the silence at the table was different. Not calm, but tense. He stood and walked to the window. The first drops of the promised rain were already trickling down the glass. I'll have to check if the windows on the top floor are closed. Businesslike, practical, without a single unnecessary emotion. This was precisely what he'd always valued in people. Efficiency, the absence of unnecessary questions and emotions. But now, this very quality in her infuriated him, because he knew it wasn't just efficiency. It was a wall she'd built between them overnight. And he, who was used to having every door in his world open to him, didn't know how to get around it. He pulled the curtain hard. That shadow, it suddenly became too tangible, too significant, and he didn't understand why. And this misunderstanding angered him more than anything. The next morning, Ayana does something new. Before going downstairs, she stands in front of a small mirror. In her hand is a barely used stick of lip gloss. The color is called rose quartz. It's barely noticeable, just adding a subtle sheen to her lips, making them a little brighter. She applies it in a thin layer. Her face in the gray uniform now seems a little different, unfamiliar even to herself. She goes to the kitchen and starts cooking. Everything is as usual. Jin-ho comes down to the dining room. He sits at the table and picks up his tablet. But today, he almost immediately looks up and looks at her. He searches her eyes, but Ayana is looking at the water carafe she's adjusting on the table. She comes over to pour him coffee. She leans over, and at that moment, the light from the lamp falls on her lips. On this light, almost ghostly pink sheen, Jin-ho freezes. In his monochrome world, black suit, white tablecloth, silverware, dark wood, this tiny pink glow becomes the brightest spot. It draws the eye like a magnet. He watches, forgetting about the coffee, about the tablet. He sees how her lips move when she speaks. Ayana. Your coffee, sir. His gaze rises to hers. She glances at the bridge of her nose, but he no longer notices. He sees only this splash of color. This is a violation of the rules. There is no room for such things in his house. For color. For sparkle. Jin-ho. You. He stops, unsure of what to say. Asking, what's on your face, would sound stupid. Ayana stands and waits, her face calm. She knows what he saw, and it's exactly what she wanted. He slowly takes the cup. Jin-ho. Thank you. He says this quietly, almost mechanically. Then he turns back to his tablet, but doesn't read anymore. He simply sits and holds the cup in his hands, feeling that pink glow burn his retinas even with his eyes closed. Another morning. Ayana spends an extra 15 minutes on her hair. Instead of her usual tight knot, she creates an intricate yet elegant braid and wraps it around her head like a crown. A few small strands of hair deliberately escape at her temples and neck. It takes effort, but she does it. She looks graceful, as if she were not a servant, but a guest in this house. When Jin-ho enters the dining room, his gaze immediately falls on her head. He pauses at the threshold a second longer than necessary. He sits down. Today he doesn't even pick up his tablet. He just looks at her while she makes him tea. Her movements are fluid. When she turns, the light plays on the smooth strands of her hair. He watches the shadow of her braid move across her neck. She places the cup in front of him, silently. She doesn't say, good morning. She just does her job. Jin-ho. The weather, he begins, trying to return to yesterday's attempt at conversation. But his thoughts are interrupted. She bends down to clear the napkin he hasn't used yet from the table, and he sees the intricate knot of her braid resting at the back of her head. He sees the delicate line of her neck beneath the stray hairs. He forgets what he wanted to say about the weather. He just watches. Ayana straightens up and meets his gaze. Again, on the bridge of her nose. Her eyes are calm and empty, but her hair says something else. It speaks of time spent on herself, of attention to detail. She screams while she remains silent. Jin-ho. Nothing. he mumbles in response to his own unfinished question. He drinks tea, which he finds tasteless today. He can't focus on anything but that braid. It hypnotizes him, like a symbol of something that eludes his understanding. Day 3 of the game. Now Ayana is changing her scent. She no longer smells like soap or furniture cleaner. She has a small bottle of jasmine-scented oil, just one drop on her wrist, and another one at her collarbone. The scent is light, fresh, yet persistent. It doesn't scream, it quietly fills the space around her. That day, Jin-ho calls her into his office to give her some housekeeping instructions. She enters and stands at a respectful distance from the desk. Jin-ho, we need to order new towels for the guest bathrooms, thicker ones. He speaks, but his nose detects something new in the air. Sweet, floral. He inhales deeply, involuntarily. The scent comes from her, Ayana. Okay, sir. I'll look at the catalogs today. Jin-ho. And the carpet in the hall, it needs to be cleaned. He tries to focus on his to-do list, but the scent of jasmine is driving him crazy. It permeates everything. It mingles with the scent of old paper and wood in the office. It seems out of place and yet intoxicating. He looks at her. She stands, looking somewhere toward the bookcase. Her new hairdo, her lips, that scent. She slowly, step by step, transforms back into the stranger from the hall. But now she does it before his eyes, and deliberately. Jin-ho. That's it, you can go. His voice sounds sharper than he intended. He needs her to go away, because that scent lingers in the room even after she leaves. He sits in his chair and breathes it in. He closes his eyes. Her image stands before him, with gloss on her lips, her elegant hairdo, surrounded by the light scent of jasmine. And he can't understand what she's up to. Why is she changing? To annoy him? To get his attention? But she doesn't attract his attention. She distracts him. He finds himself thinking all day not about business, but about what move she'll make tomorrow. What other detail in her flawless servant image will change to upset him again? He gets up and goes to the window, opening it wide to let in the cold air from outside. But the scent of jasmine seems to have clung to the curtains. It doesn't go away. This shadow has learned to leave a trace, and it's driving him crazy. Ho's irritation reached its limit. Her calm, her elusive glances, that stupid jasmine scent. It all got on his nerves. He needed a reaction. Any reaction. Anger, fear, surprise, anything but this icy, indifferent perfection. After dinner, he called her into his study. An old crystal ashtray, a heavy, faceted object inherited from his father, stood on the edge of the table. He picked it up, pretending to examine it. Jin-ho. I think it's time to wash it. It's starting to show. He handed her the ashtray, but just as her fingers were about to touch the crystal, he released his grip. On purpose, carelessly. The ashtray fell. Its fall seemed agonizingly slow. It should have shattered on the hard parquet floor with a deafening crack. It should have shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. It should have finally torn the mask from that perfect face. But this did not happen. Ayana's hand darted down faster than thought. Her fingers, strong and nimble, closed around the falling object, cushioning the impact. She caught the ashtray a centimeter from the floor, without a sound, without a single expression on her face. She didn't flinch, she didn't scream, she didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply looked at the ashtray in her hand, as if catching a dropped towel. Then she slowly straightened up. She placed the ashtray back on the table, in exactly the same place. Her movements were smooth, as if nothing had happened. She looked at him, again, at the bridge of his nose. Her eyes were empty, like glass. Ayana. Wash, sir? There was no reproach or question in her voice, just a statement of fact. Jin-ho felt heat spread across his cheeks. He'd tried to test her, and she'd passed with flying colors. Moreover, she'd demonstrated agility and composure he hadn't expected. Jin-ho. Yes. No. Later. His own voice sounded stupid. Ayana nodded silently. She turned and walked out of the office. She didn't wait for further orders. She simply walked away, leaving him alone with a feeling of utter defeat and a strange, piercing curiosity. He couldn't leave it like that. This mystery was eating him up inside. Who was she? What kind of person was hiding behind this mask of the perfect servant? Why hadn't he seen anything for 10 years? After dinner, he called Chang Ming, his most trusted man, to him. And ho. I need information about Ayane. Chang Min. About the maid boss? What exactly? And ho. Everything. Where she's from, her family, her friends, what she does when she's not here, who she sees. Chang Ming nodded without asking any further questions. His expression remained impassive, but Jin Ho detected a hint of surprise in his eyes. Why would the boss bother digging into the servants' lives? Chang Min left. The investigation took 2 days. When he returned with the report, Jin Ho was waiting for him in the office with an impatience he was ashamed of. Chang Min. It's very simple, boss. Almost nothing. Jin Ho. What do you mean, say nothing? Chang Min. She's an orphan, no parents. Officially worked for you for 10 years. Before that, she lived in an orphanage. She rents an apartment in the old district. Small, cheap. The only acquaintance is one friend, Sora. She works as a hairdresser. They see each other sometimes. No other contacts have been noted. Doesn't go to clubs, doesn't party. After work, she goes home. Like clockwork. Jin Ho listened, his irritation growing. This was the biography of a ghost. An empty, faceless life, Jin Ho. That's it? No men? No connections? Chang Min. None, boss. As if she really lives here just for work. Chang Min left, leaving Jin Ho even more confused than before. It seemed she really had been nothing but a shadow. All these years. But where did this strength come from? This composure? This sudden defiance in her silence? He thought he'd find a key, a lover, a secret life, something that would explain the change in her. But he found only emptiness. And this emptiness, devoted exclusively to his home, its comfort, now seemed unbearable to him. Ayana noticed a change in his demeanor. Now he wasn't just trying to catch her eye. He was watching her. As she polished the silver in the dining room, she felt his gaze on her back from behind the study door. As she dusted the banister on the stairs, he stood in the hall below, pretending to talk on the phone, but his eyes were fixed on her movements. Before, his gaze slid over her like furniture. Now it was heavy, tangible, like a touch. He studied her every gesture, every movement, searching for a flaw, searching for anything that would betray her performance. And a strange, icy satisfaction was born inside Ayana. It was bitter and sweet at the same time. He finally saw. But he didn't see her, Ayana. He saw a mystery. He saw the object of his irritation and interest. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of all these years, but it was something. It was power, small, fragile, but power nonetheless. One evening, as she was lighting the fireplace in the living room, he'd ordered it, even though it wasn't that cold outside. He came in and sat in the armchair opposite her. He didn't read. He didn't work. He just sat and watched her work her magic over the logs. She felt his gaze on her hands, on the crook of her neck, as she leaned forward. Before, she would have shrunk, disappeared into herself. Now she allowed him to watch. Her movements remained as smooth and precise as ever. She stood, dusted off her hands, and, without looking at him, headed for the door. She knew he was watching her. And at that moment, already in the hallway, where he couldn't see her, she allowed herself a barely perceptible cold smile, the smile of a hunter who senses the game walking into his trap. The library was quiet and dusty. A ray of sunlight fell on rows of old books in dark bindings. Ayana slowly ran a rag over the spines, removing the gray film. She didn't hear him come in. He moved silently, just like she did. She reached up to the high shelf to dust the top edge. The book was unevenly positioned on the shelf. Ayana tried to straighten it, to push it back into place. At that very moment, his hand appeared from the other side of the shelf. He apparently wanted to take another book. Their fingers didn't touch. They barely touched. Just barely. Just their tips. For less than a second. But that was enough. Ayana jerked her hand away as if from hot metal, abruptly, almost instinctively. Her heart pounded wildly, slamming against her ribs. The warmth of his skin, fleeting and accidental, burned her. She took a step back, finally looking up at him, not at the bridge of his nose, right at his face. Something wild flashed in her gaze for a moment. Panic, disgust, or something else. He, too, froze. His hand still rested on the spine of the book. He stared at her, eyes wide. He saw that flash. He saw the mask of icy calm crack. Not triumph, but rather shock. Shock at the force of her reaction. Jin-ho. Sorry, he said quietly. It was a strange word. He had never apologized to her. The sound of his voice brought her back to reality. She looked down again, catching herself. Her face was smooth and empty again, but inside the storm was still raging. Ayana. It's okay, sir. I'll finish later. She couldn't stand being here any longer. She turned quickly and practically ran out of the library, leaving him alone in the dusty sunlight. His fingers still feeling the ghostly warmth of her skin, his head full of new, uncomfortable questions. The tension that had been building in Jin-ho since their encounter in the hallway found its outlet. Not on her. Never on her. That would have been an admission of her power over his emotions. It spilled out onto whoever was at hand. It was a young security guard, Do-hyun. The boy had messed up the duty roster, and at midday, one of the gate posts was empty for 10 minutes. A minor detail. Normally, Jin-ho would have given it a cold reprimand. But not today. Jin-ho walked into the hall just as Chong-min was quietly scolding the offender. Upon seeing their boss, both froze. Chang-min. Boss, it's a minor mistake. Jin-ho didn't let him finish. He walked right up to Do-hyun. His face was pale with suppressed rage. Jin-ho. Small. An empty post at the main gate is small? His voice was quiet, but that made it even more frightening. Do-hyun? Sir, Jin-ho. Do you think this is some kind of kindergarten? That you can just leave whenever you want? Do you know what could have happened in those 10 minutes? He didn't yell. He hissed. Every word hit like a whip. The young guard cowered, not daring to look up. At that moment, Ayana emerged from the dining room, carrying an empty tray. She saw the scene and stopped dead at the edge of the stairs. Her presence was barely noticeable, but Jin-ho sensed it. It was as if the radar in his brain had detected her gaze. This added fuel to the fire. Now he was performing in front of her, and this infuriated him even more. Jin-ho. You're a security hole. You're the weak link. It's people like you that make everything fall apart. He spoke of the post, of the gate. But other images swirled in his head. A caught ashtray, a fleeting glance, the scent of jasmine, a cracked mask in the library. His perfect control over everything, even his own attention, was faltering. And this boy became the lightning rod. Chang-min tried to intervene. Chang-min, boss, he gets it. It won't happen again. Jin-ho turned sharply to him. Jin-ho, and who are you responsible for? Him? Then you're to blame too. 2 days without pay, for both of them. To get their heads straight, he pronounced his verdict and, without looking at anyone else, turned abruptly and walked into his office, slamming the door loudly. A heavy silence fell over the hall. Do-hyun was as pale as a sheet. Chang-min was breathing heavily, clenching his fists. Ayana slowly descended the stairs and walked past them toward the kitchen. Not a muscle moved on her face, but inside, she understood everything. This anger wasn't over an empty post. It was anger at her game, and the fact that he lost it. A friend only proved her victory. His iron control cracked, and the crack passed through everything that surrounded him. Several days passed. Tension hung in the air in the house like a thunderstorm before rain. Ayana continued her game, flawless, silent, invisible. And then she put the dress back on. This time it was black, simple, but perfectly fitting. It accentuated the line of her shoulders, waist, and hips. It didn't scream. It made a statement. She let her hair down again and applied the same subtle gloss to her lips. She came out of her room just as Jin-ho was descending from his office to the second floor. He froze on the stairs when he saw her. She walked down the hallway below, heading for the main exit. She knew he was there. She felt his gaze, heavy and hot, on her back. But she didn't turn around. She kept walking, her heels tapping a quiet, precise rhythm on the parquet floor. It was a blow below the belt for him. After everything, after her coldness, after his breakdown, after the painful realization that he'd been blind for 10 years, she was turning into that stranger again. She was retreating into a world where he had no power over her, a world where she could smile, laugh, live. That world where he had once failed to recognize her, but now knew her all too well and couldn't come to terms with it. He descended the stairs as if in a dream, his legs carrying him on their own, ahead of his thoughts. Ayana reached the heavy oak door and reached out to press the handle. His hand landed on the door above, blocking her movement. He didn't grab her. He simply pressed his palm against the wood, and that was enough. She was trapped between his body and the door. She turned slowly. Their faces were very close now. She could see the smallest details, the dark shadow of stubble on his jaw, the thin white line of an old scar at his temple, the dilated pupils in his dark eyes. He didn't look at her dress or her hair. He looked straight into her eyes, and his gaze lacked his usual control. Something wild, primal raged there, something that couldn't be contained within the words order or prohibition. Jin-ho, you're not going anywhere. His voice was hoarse, low. There was no boss's command in it. There was something else in it. Animal, possessive. As if a dragon had lain down at the entrance to its cave, blocking the treasure that had suddenly decided to leave. Ayana didn't flinch. She lifted her chin. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat, but she didn't lower her eyes. She looked at him, directly, for the first time in all these weeks of playing, and in her eyes he saw neither the fear of a servant nor the emptiness of a shadow. He saw a challenge, deep, chilling, full of hidden pain. Ayana. Why? One word. It hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. It contained everything. Why can't I leave? Why did you stop me? Why haven't you seen me for 10 years? Why are you looking now? He was prepared for anything, for tears, for excuses, for submission. But not for this simple, crushing question. He couldn't find an answer, because the answer was irrational. The answer was, because I can't allow it, because you're mine, because I finally saw. But he couldn't say that. That would be a defeat. He was silent, and then she spoke. Quietly, but so clearly, that each word cut into him like a knife in Ayana. I've been here for 10 years. 10 years serving you coffee in the morning. 10 years washing your shirts and dusting your books. 10 years hearing you talk on the phone, walking around the house, breathing in your sleep. She paused briefly. Her eyes were shining, but there were no tears. Ayana, I know that you get a headache when you drink whiskey. I know that you like it when I put a spoonful of sugar in your cup, even though I never add any. I know every inch of this house, and I know you, better than anyone, I think. She looked at his hand, still pressing the door. Ayana, and you never saw me. Until that evening, you looked through me, like through air. And even when you saw me, you asked, who are you? Because my face meant nothing to you. It still doesn't. It's not me you're seeing now. You see your problem, your unruly thing. It was an accusation. Calm, without hysteria. That made it 10 times more powerful. She had turned all his vague feelings, all his uncontrollable interest, inside out and revealed to him its essence. Not interest in a person, but the irritation of a possessive man whose perfectly tuned system had malfunctioned. His hand clenched into a fist on the door's wood. Fury flashed in his eyes, fury at being found out. But underneath it was something else. Shame? Confusion? He took a step back. He removed his hand from the door, but not to let her through. He cut off her escape in another way. His face became a mask again, but it was a fragile mask. The cracks in it were visible. Jin-ho. You're right, he admitted it. Simple and brutal. Jin-ho. I was blind, stupid, I didn't see. He said it with difficulty, as if the words were sharp shards. Jin-ho. You wanted to leave for the evening. I delayed you, disrupted your plans. He paused, choosing his words. It was new for him, choosing his words for her. Jin-ho. So I owe you. Compensation. Ayana became wary. Where was he leading? Jin-ho, your shift is over. You're free to go, but not to go somewhere. Stay. Here, join me for dinner. He looked at her black dress. Jin-ho, you're already dressed for this. It wasn't a request. It was a new trap, disguised as an apology. He couldn't force her to stay in the house as a servant, but he could try to keep her as a guest, as a companion. He was changing the rules of the game to stay in control. He offered her a seat at the table, not served it. But the table was still in the same golden cage. Ayana looked at him, assessing him. Leaving now would mean returning to the status quo, to his silent fury and her invisibility. Staying. That was a risk, entering an unknown zone. But it was also an opportunity to look up to him, not just from below. An opportunity to speak, not listen. She slowly released the door handle she was still holding. Ayana. Compensation? She said the word with a slight, barely perceptible mockery. Jin-ho. Yes. And a correction. He couldn't say, I want to know you, but it hung in the air. Ayana nodded slowly, her face expressionless. Ayana. Okay, for one dinner. She turned and walked back into the house, toward the dining room, leaving him by the door. She walked, aware that he was watching her. And she knew she had accepted the invitation not because she had forgiven him, but because the game was entering a new, dangerous phase, and she had no intention of backing down. The dining room table was set as if awaiting important guests. Silverware, crystal glasses, a snow-white tablecloth. Candles stood in the center, their flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ayana sat down in the chair usually occupied by one of his business partners, directly across from him. She rested her hands on her knees, her back straight. She didn't look around. Her gaze was fixed on her plate. Jin-ho sat at the head of the table. He wasn't eating, he was studying her. His gaze moved slowly from her hands, resting on the dark fabric of her dress, to her face, illuminated by the candles. He watched as someone looked at an unfamiliar, complex machine, trying to understand how it worked. The servant, a young man whom Ayana had trained herself, brought the first course. He tried not to look at them, sensing the icy tension in the air. He placed a bowl of soup in front of Ayana. She nodded silently. Jin-ho took a spoon. She took hers. The sound of metal on porcelain seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. They ate. Silently. The only sounds were the soft clink of dishes and the crackling of candles. He watched her eat, carefully, silently, with a dignity he'd never expected from a maid. Not a hint of awkwardness. As if she'd always sat at this table. Jin-ho. Wine? He reached for the decanter. Ayana. No thank you. Her voice was even and polite. She took a sip of water from her glass. He poured himself a drink, even though he didn't want to. He needed something to do with his hands. He felt stupid. He'd started this dinner to regain control, to put her in some new, yet still definitive place. Instead, he sat there, unsure of what to do next. She was like an alien at his table, close, yet utterly incomprehensible. The servant removed the bowls of soup and brought the main course. Ayana thanked him in a whisper. Thank you, Min. Jin-ho noticed that she knew the servant's name. She knew it, and she used it. But she hadn't mentioned his name even once all evening. When the servant left, leaving them alone with their main courses almost untouched, the silence became unbearable. It was deafening. Jin-ho pushed his plate away. The sound of porcelain on wood finally made Ayana look up at him. She met his gaze and didn't look away. She simply waited. He leaned his elbows on the table, folding his hands in front of him. The candles illuminated his face from below, making it appear more intense. Jin-ho. What do you want, Ayana? He spoke her name, for the first time that evening. Perhaps for the first time in years, not in the context of an order. His voice lacked its former firmness. It was a tired, sincere question, the question of a man lost and without a map. Ayana slowly placed her fork and knife on her plate. Her movements were silent. She looked at him, and something moved in her eyes. Not triumph, not anger. Something more complex. Sadness, perhaps. He waited. He expected a list. Money, a new apartment, a new job, a vacation. something tangible that could be given or refused, returning everything to a clear deal. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the candle flame between them, then back at him. Ayana, I want to be seen. Her voice was quiet, but every word fell like a stone into a well. She paused, letting him understand this. Then she continued. Ayana, but not like now. Not like something that suddenly caught people's attention because it's out of order. Not like a curiosity being studied because it doesn't fit in with the decor. She spoke calmly, without reproach. Simply stating a fact. Ayana, and not like a servant at the master's table. That's not to see either. It's just a change of scenery. She took a deep breath. Ayana, I want to be seen as a person who gets tired, who likes some things and dislikes others, who has her own life outside the walls of this house, even if it's very small and gray. It's still life. My life. And not an extension of yours. She finished. There was nothing more to say. She had laid it all out. Not her dreams of greatness, but a simple, basic need. To be recognized as a person. Not a function, not a shadow, not a problem. Jin-ho sat, completely still. Her words didn't demand action. They demanded something from him that perhaps he didn't have. The ability to see as she asked. He always saw people in categories: useful, useless, loyal, dangerous, friend, foe. Human, with its complexity, its inner world. It was too abstract, too inconvenient a category, especially when applied to someone who was simply supposed to provide him with comfort. But now, looking at her by candlelight, at her calm, tired face, at her eyes that held no plea, only expectation, whether he would understand or not, he felt for the first time the full, monstrous weight of his previous indifference. He thought he was ignoring a servant, but he was ignoring a whole person. He opened his mouth to say something. Apologize? Promise? But all the words felt hollow and false. He couldn't promise to see her. He didn't even know how. Instead, he asked again, more stupidly and desperately. Jin-ho, what do you like? In your life. Outside the walls. It was a pitiful, tiny step. But it wasn't a step from a master to a servant. It was, perhaps, the first step of one person to another. A step into the unknown, where there were no set rules or scenarios. And that made him uneasy. Ayana looked at him, and something seemed to tremble deep in her eyes. Not a smile, not a softening, but a slight, barely perceptible surprise. He asked a question, not about work, not about home, about her. The silence that followed her answer and his clumsy question hung in the air, but now it was no longer oppressive. It was different, fragile, tense, but with a new sense of space. Ayana looked at him, considering her answer. What did she like? Simple things he never asked about. Ayana, I like to brew tea in the morning in my apartment, slowly, hear the water boil in an ordinary kettle, and look out the window at the old poplar in the yard. She spoke slowly, as if listening to these words herself. Ayana, and books, old, tattered, from the library on the corner, about faraway countries, or just about other people. Jin-ho listened, nodding. This wasn't what he expected. Nothing grand. Nothing to buy or give as a gift. Just pieces of a quiet, private life. Jin-ho, what countries? He asked, just to keep the conversation going, so that this new, fragile bridge between them wouldn't collapse. Ayana, Scandinavia. Fjords, cold sea, silence. She smiled faintly. Probably because it's so quiet there. Then something broke. Not completely, but a crack in the ice wall allowed a thin stream to escape. He no longer tried to remain silent. He began to speak. At first hesitantly, then more and more freely. Not about personal matters, not at all. He talked about business, but he didn't give orders. He shared his problems, as if with an advisor. Jin-ho. The timber supplier is delaying the shipment again. He's talking about logistics issues. Ayana, after thinking, you had a backup contract with that company from Incheon. Last year they worked flawlessly, even when there were interruptions. He looked at her in surprise. Did she remember such details? Jin-ho. You're right. We need to get them up and running immediately. Then the conversation turned to the books in his library. He asked which ones she polished most often. Ayana. The ones by the window. They're the ones collecting dust the most. They're mostly history books and one volume of poetry. Really old. Jin-ho. Poetry? Which one? Ayana. Kim Sewol. Azaleas. He was silent. He didn't even remember that book being there. He'd never picked it up. They sat like that for another hour. He spoke, she responded, restrainedly, briefly, but always to the point, intelligently and precisely. It was a strange dialogue, a dialogue between two people who suddenly discovered that 10 years of silence concealed not a void, but a whole world of observation, knowledge, and a quiet, sharp mind on the one hand, and a world of lonely decisions and alienation on the other. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even closeness. It was a truce, a temporary ceasefire in a war they were both waging in their own ways. But in this truce, there was an opportunity to see each other in no man's land. The truce lasted for several days. They talked in the morning over breakfast, about the weather, the news, the little things around the house. He no longer looked into the space over her shoulder. He looked at her when she answered. Sometimes she allowed herself to meet his gaze, not for long. And then what happened in his world happened, unexpectedly and cruelly. It was late evening. Ayana was about to retire to her room when a commotion burst into the house. Loud voices, heavy, hurried footsteps. Chang-min and two others dragged Jin-ho into the hall. He was on his feet, but his face was chalk white, and the dark fabric of his jacket had a strange sheen at the side, clinging to his body. Ayana froze on the stairs. She'd seen this before, once or twice in 10 years. But then she'd been immediately sent away, and then she'd have to scrub the stains off the floor. Now everything was different. Jin-ho, staggering, raised his head and saw her. Their gazes met. There was no command in his eyes, not even pain. There was a clear, cold need and something else. Trust? Jin-ho, through clenched teeth, said to Chang-min, Jin-ho, everyone, out, outside, secure the perimeter. Chang-min, but the boss, the doctor. Jin-ho, call him, but he'll wait outside. Until she says so. He nodded towards Ayana. Everyone froze. Chang-min looked from his boss to Ayana, with silent questioning and disbelief. Ayana didn't wait. She was already down the stairs. Ayana, first aid kit, big one. From the office, clean towels, boiling water, quickly. Her voice was even and commanding. Chang-min, stunned, rushed to do so. She approached Jin-ho and, without asking, helped him to the small conference room on the ground floor. It was closer than his bedroom. He sank heavily onto the leather sofa, his head resting on the back. His breathing was ragged. Chang-min brought everything. Ayana closed the door in his face, leaving them alone. She knelt on the floor next to the sofa. Her hands weren't shaking. She unbuttoned his jacket and shirt. The wound wasn't deep, but it was long and ugly, and blood was oozing from it. The bullet had merely grazed his ribs. He stared at the ceiling, clenching his fists. Then he looked at her. She was concentrating on cleaning the wound with antiseptic, her face serious and calm. There was no fear or disgust in her movements, only purposeful efficiency. Jin H. Gritting his teeth. Stupid. My mistake. I miscalculated. Ayana, without looking up from her work. Now be quiet. Breathe evenly. He fell silent, submitting. And in this submission, there was an absolute, terrifying vulnerability. He, the man who controlled everything, lay helpless while being bandaged by someone he hadn't noticed for decades. His life was literally in her hands. The night grew long. The fever overtook him quickly, as Ayana had predicted. The small room was stuffy. She didn't leave. She sat on a chair next to him, changing the cool compresses on his forehead. He was tossing and turning, half asleep. Delirious. He was uttering fragmentary words about deals, about names she didn't know. Ayana listened, remaining a stony island in the delirious stream. And then, in the midst of the heat, he suddenly spoke clearly. His hand, hot and dry, darted out and found hers lying on the edge of the sofa. He squeezed it so hard the bones cracked. Jin-ho, without opening his eyes. "Don't go." The voice was hoarse, full of childish, urgent anxiety. "Jin-ho, don't disappear. Promise. Promise you won't become a shadow again." Ayana froze. Her hand burned in his grip. She looked at his face, drawn, covered in sweat, with dark circles under his eyes. It wasn't the face of a boss. It was the face of a wounded, frightened man. A man who feared not death, but a return to loneliness. The loneliness in which he had imprisoned himself, and from which she, with her silent rebellion, had briefly rescued him. She didn't promise. She couldn't. But she didn't pull her hand away. She let him hold her. Her fingers lay motionless in his palm, a cool anchor in his fevered delirium. "Ayana, I'm here," she said quietly. "Just stating a fact." That seemed to be enough. His breathing evened out a bit. The muscles in his face relaxed. He didn't let go of her hand, but his grip loosened. She sat like that for the rest of the night, in silence, broken only by his ragged breathing and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She looked at their intertwined hands, at his strong, now helpless fingers, and she felt the last wall of icy satisfaction melt inside her, filled with her own revenge. Revenge could be achieved through indifference, but what could one do with it? With this naked, burning trust? With this fear of losing someone he didn't even consider present? When the light outside grew brighter and the fever subsided, he finally fell into a deep but restful sleep. Only then did she carefully free her numb hand. She stood up. Her body ached from the awkward position. She looked at him sleeping, vulnerable, real. And she realized the game was over. Something else, more dangerous and incomprehensible, had just begun. Ho's recovery took several weeks. A strange, subdued atmosphere permeated the house. Orders were now issued through Changmin, and the boss himself rarely left his second-floor apartment. Ayana returned to her duties, but everything was different. In the morning, she still prepared breakfast, but now it took place not in the dining room, but in a small, sunny room on the second floor where she was allowed. She placed the tray on the table next to his chair, and every time she entered, he looked up from the window or from his papers and looked at her. Simply looked, recognized. "Thank you," he said quietly. And it wasn't a formality. She nodded and was about to leave, but he often stopped her with some question unrelated to work. "How's your poplar tree doing?" he asked one day. Ayana, already standing in the doorway, turned around, slightly surprised. "It's turning green, almost covered in leaves already." "Good," he said, and there was something akin to satisfaction in his voice, as if it were important. The dynamic shifted without words. He no longer tried to catch her eye. He simply watched when she was in sight, studying her habits, her mannerisms, not as a mystery, but as a fact. As someone who had become part of his landscape, but this time visible, tangible. Ayana, for her part, stopped pretending not to see him. When he looked, she sometimes held his gaze for a few seconds. She answered his questions, still reserved, but without the previous icy wall. However, she maintained her distance, physical and emotional. She didn't linger in his room too long. She didn't initiate conversation. She was polite, respectful. But within her, a clear, invisible line remained. One day, he asked her to bring him books from the library. The one about the fjords, if you can find them, and the one with the poetry. Ayana found them and brought them. She placed the books on the table next to him. "Thank you," he said, looking at the spines, not at her. Then he added, as if by accident, "You can take any of them you want to read, without asking." It was a gesture, a small key to a part of his world. She nodded. "Okay, thank you." But she didn't take a single book from the library. She continued to borrow her own, tattered ones from the local library. Her independence, her small gray life beyond the walls of the mansion, was now her fortress. And she had no intention of opening the gates unnecessarily. The day Jin-ho finally got back on his feet and resumed his usual routine was marked by another change. He summoned her to his office that evening, not to the sunny room, but to his true lair, behind his massive ebony desk. Ayana entered, expecting an order, or perhaps a formal thank you. She stood before the desk, as she had so many times before. But now her posture was straight, her gaze calmly meeting his. Jin-ho wasn't sitting. He was standing by the window, his back to the evening city. He turned around. His face was serious, collected. The traces of his illness had almost faded, but a new depth had appeared in his eyes, a shadow of past vulnerability. "Sit down, Ayana," he said, pointing to the guest chair. She slowly sank to the edge of the chair, keeping her distance. He paced the room, gathering his thoughts, then stopped in front of her. "You saved my life. Not just by bandaging the wound. There, in that room. You stayed." He spoke with difficulty, choosing words that were foreign to him. "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks, about what you said at dinner, about what I didn't see." He walked over to the table and leaned his elbows on it, looking at her directly. "I can't change the past, and I can't see, as you asked. It's not my nature. I see functions, strengths and weaknesses, usefulness." He paused. "Your usefulness to me has changed. You're no longer just a housekeeper. You kept it in order when I was weak. You saw me, the real me, and you didn't run away, and you didn't take advantage of me." Ayana listened without moving. She sensed where he was leading, and her insides tightened in anticipation. "I'm offering you a choice," he said clearly. "You can leave. Now. With good money that will last a long time. And we will never see each other again." He paused, watching her reaction. Her face was expressionless. "Or you can stay, but not as a servant." He straightened, his voice firmer, but not the previous coldness. More businesslike, proposing a deal. "My organization, it's like this house. It requires order, predictability, intelligence. I have soldiers like Cheng Ming. I have accountants, middlemen, but there's no one who sees the whole picture. From the dust on the books to," he waved his hand, "to the aftermath of bullets." He looked at her again. "You see, you've seen it all for 10 years, and you're not afraid to tell the truth, even to my face. I need a right hand like that. Not for the dirty work, for clarity, to see what I might miss, to be. My eyes where my own blindness might become a problem." He paused one last time, letting her understand the full weight of the offer. "This isn't a job. It's a position. With respect, with influence, with money you've never had. And with risk. You'll be part of this world. For real." The office fell silent. The offer hung in the air, enormous and dangerous. He wasn't offering her friendship or love. He was offering power, limited but real. He acknowledged her value, but he framed that acknowledgement within the terms of his universe. A universe of hierarchy, control, and danger. Ayana sat, digesting his words. Right hand. See the real him. He was offering her entry into the very heart of his fortress, but on his terms, to become not a shadow, but a part of the machine. An important part, but still a cog in his machine. She looked up at him. There was no longer the same obsession or irritation in his gaze. There was calculating hope and brutal honesty. He needed her, not as a woman, but as an ally, as someone who could compensate for his weakness, that very human blindness she had spoken of. She stood up slowly. She walked over to the window, standing next to him, but looking not at him, but at the city lights. You're asking me to trade the invisibility of a servant for the visibility of an assistant, she said quietly, but to remain within these walls, your walls. Yes, he answered honestly. That's all I can offer. I have nothing else to give. Ayana nodded, still staring into the darkness. She thought of her small apartment, of the poplar tree, of the silence that belonged only to her. And she thought of the power he laid at her feet, of the opportunity to finally be seen as an equal, but at what cost? I need to think, she said finally, turning to him. This isn't a choice you make in a minute. Something like disappointment, but also respect, flickered across his face. He nodded. Of course, you have time. She headed for the door, feeling his gaze on her back. She paused at the threshold, not turning around. Thank you for the offer and for your honesty. And she left, leaving him alone with his empire and the new uncomfortable knowledge that the most valuable thing in his world had just slipped from his control and was now deciding its own fate. The outcome of this game no longer depended solely on him. Ayana didn't delay. She gave herself 3 days. 3 days to wander the mansion that was both a prison and a home. 3 days to observe his new attentive gaze. 3 days to mentally assume the role of his right hand. She imagined herself sitting in the next office, studying documents, giving advice. Her opinion would mean something. People who had previously looked past her would listen to her. She would have money, lots of money. She would be able to buy anything. Want would disappear. But with money and influence comes another chain. More subtle and more durable, she will become part of his world. A world of shadows, calculations, silent threats. She will see things that cannot be forgotten. She will make choices that will leave a stain. She will become his reflection in this world. Useful, valuable, but still a reflection. Another precious, complex piece in his collection. On the 4th day, early in the morning, she knocked on his office door. She was still wearing her gray uniform, but today it seemed less like a symbol of submission than armor. "Come in," his voice was heard. He sat at the table, but wasn't working. He seemed to be waiting. On the table in front of him stood 2 envelopes. One was thin and businesslike. The other was thicker. Ayana stopped in front of the table. She did not sit down. "I've decided," she said simply, without preamble. He looked at her, his face an impassive mask, but she caught a hint of tension in his eyes. "What is your choice?" he asked quietly. Ayana took a deep breath. She looked straight at him. "Ayana, I refuse. Everything." She saw his fingers lightly tighten on the edge of the table, but he remained silent, letting her finish. "Ayana, your offer. It's the greatest honor you could bestow upon me. I understand that, and thank you for your trust. But I cannot accept it." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected it, but was still surprised. "Jin-ho, money doesn't tempt you? Or power?" There was no mockery in his voice, only a sincere question. "Ayana, they are tempting, of course, but the price is too high." She took a step closer. "Ayana, you are gearing me to become your eyes. But what will these eyes see? Only your reality, your wars, your deals, your dangers. I will lose mine, that small, quiet reality, with tea in the morning and old books. The one that I have only just begun to truly see for myself." She paused, gathering her thoughts into words he could understand. "Ayana, for 10 years I was invisible to you. Then I became a problem. Then an interest. Then a useful tool. But never just a person. And once I become your right hand, I will become a very valuable tool. Expensive, important, but still a tool. In a gold frame, but a tool nonetheless. And I now see myself, and that's enough for me." It was said. The silence in the office became absolute. He sat motionless, digesting her words. "I see myself." For a man who always determined the value of others, this phrase sounded like a revelation and a death sentence. He reached for the thick envelope and pushed it to the edge of the table. "Jin-ho, this is for your service, and for that night. This isn't payment. It's just money. Enough to start something of your own." Then he touched the thin envelope. "Jin-ho, and here's a recommendation, not from me, from a reputable company. They're looking for a responsible manager for a small business. Your name is already there. You can come, or throw it away." Ayana looked at the envelopes, then at him. It was a gesture, awkward but honest. He wasn't clinging. He was offering her a way out on her terms. And that was more respectful than the whole offer to become his right-hand man. She took both envelopes. The thick one was heavy. The thin one was almost weightless, but meaningful. "Ayana, thank you." She had nothing more to say. He nodded again, his gaze becoming distant for a moment. "Jin-ho, when are you leaving, Ayana?" "Today, now." "Jin-ho, okay." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her again. It sounded quiet, almost embarrassed. Jin-ho. Ayana. She turned around. Jin-ho. That poplar. Which street does it grow on? The question was so unexpected, simple, and completely meaningless in his world that she was momentarily taken aback. Then a barely perceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. Ayana. At 14 Sadovaya, in the old courtyard. Jin-ho. 40 Sadovaya, he repeated, as if memorizing an important code. Got it. Their gazes met for the last time within these walls. He looked at her not as an object, not as a problem, not as a tool. He looked at her as a person leaving, and in his gaze there was regret, respect, and something else she didn't bother to decipher. She left the office without looking back. Her bag was already packed. It contained a few things, 2 envelopes, and the keys to a small apartment she could now buy if she wanted. She walked down the hall where she had once encountered him in a dress. She touched the cool surface of the oak door with her hand and stepped outside into the bright, sunny day. The door closed behind her with a quiet but final click. A year has passed. A small cafe opened on a quiet, discreet street in the city center. It was called simply The Corner. Inside, it smelled of freshly baked goods, expensive coffee, and something else entirely: peace. The walls were painted a warm color, and the shelves were lined with books that anyone could read. Among them were old volumes of poetry and books about distant lands. The hostess was a young woman named Ayana. She greeted guests with a quiet smile, made coffee herself, and sometimes, during quiet hours, sat by the window with a book. She learned to look people in the eye, easily and openly. Her life was full and quiet, just the way she wanted it. She was her own mistress. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the last customers had left and she was washing cups behind the counter, her gaze would drift to the street. Across the street, in the shadow of the old building, a long black car would sometimes park. It might stay there for an hour, or it might show up for 10 minutes and drive away. Silently, no one ever got out. Ayana knew whose car it was. She wasn't afraid. She was simply noticing, like she noticed the weather. One rainy autumn evening, he showed up without a car. She'd gone out to take out the trash in the backyard and almost collided with him at the corner of the building. He was standing under an umbrella, wearing a dark coat, without an entourage. He simply stood there, looking at the illuminated windows of her cafe. They stood frozen, separated by a few meters and a veil of autumn rain. He looked at her, not as a runaway servant or a valuable loss. He looked at a woman in a simple sweater and apron, with her hair carefully combed, her face expressing a peace he had never seen before. Ayana didn't lower her gaze. She looked back at him. She saw the rain dripping off his umbrella, his face a little sterner over the past year, but his eyes weren't as icy as before. There was weariness and attention. He didn't say hello. He didn't come over. He simply nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, I see, you're here, and you're doing well. Ayana nodded slowly in response. And then, for the first time in years, her lips revealed something other than a cold, vengeful smile or the forced smile of a servant. She allowed herself a subtle, yet genuine smile, the smile of someone who sees another and isn't afraid of that gaze. He lingered on her smile for a second longer, then nodded again, more sharply, and turned away. His silhouette vanished into the gray shroud of rain and evening lights. Ayana returned to the cafe. She closed the door, put the kettle on. She looked at the rain outside the window and thought that perhaps it, too, was learning. Learning to look. Not as a property owner, but simply as a person. Looking at another person. Through the glass, from a distance. She wouldn't return to his world, and he wouldn't enter her cafe. But they were no longer blind to each other. A quiet, invisible thread of recognition now existed between them. It wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The beginning of something incomprehensible and fragile. A game in which there were no winners or losers, only two people who finally saw each other. And she was now writing the rules of this game. Simple rules: respect, distance, and a silence in which you can hear the other person breathing, somewhere out there, in their own separate world.